Right, let's kick off then. So, as introduction, my name is George Turner. I'm the Chief Executive of Carneys Community, a small charity down in Battersea, working with disadvantaged young people. And I've got the pleasure of being joined by Stephen today, who most people will better know as Professor Green.
How you doing, mate? Are you all right?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. Thanks for joining us.
That's all right. I'd much rather be doing it in person. It's a bit weird, all this, isn't it?
Nightmares. I seem to spend my life doing Zoom.
I've had a whole year of it and I'm still not used to it.
It's knackering. It's knackering. It's amazing how tiring it is actually sitting there in front of a screen 24/7.
Yeah, no good for your eyes.
No, exactly. Right, so if we can start just with, if you could give us a bit of a background into your upbringing and what your upbringing was like.
My upbringing was, normally people start by going, Jesus, it must be hard if they know anything about where I come from. And I always laugh and I'm like, it's not like I come from Wiltshire. You know, I spent 13 years in Wiltshire and then someone airlifted me and dropped me off by parachute into Clapton in Hackney. I didn't have any perspective. My upbringing was wicked. It wasn't easy. It definitely wasn't easy. When I was born, there were 6 of us in a 3-bedroom flat in Upper Clapton in Hackney. There was my great-grandmother, my grandmother, her daughter, my mum, and her 2 brothers, and me. And it was busy and it was stressful. The first person to leave was my mum. She was 16 when she had me. My dad was only 18 and I didn't live with him for any portion of my life. So I stayed at my nan's. Actually, something I was told is that when I was born, my mum looked so young that even though she'd just given birth to me, the nurse gave me straight to my nan because it was a more obvious thing to do. You know, my nan looked more the age of a parent because she already was one. She was already parent to 3 children. And that kind of set the tone for the rest of my childhood, really. My nan became my legal guardian by the time I was 3. I didn't live with her until I moved out. Grew up in East London, in Hackney, as I said, which was interesting. It wasn't a place full of people with beards and New Balance trainers back then. It was there was no £3.50 cups of coffee. It was a much different place then to what it is now. It's funny how, like, I was talking to my friends about this recently, some of the people I grew up with, and I was like, don't you think it's weird how we all spent our childhoods growing up somewhere that we all wanted to get away from? But it wasn't actually the area, it was the circumstances. It was the social conditions that we wanted to escape from, not the area. It's a very desirable area to live in now. Albeit, I think that as much as everyone says Hackney's changed, I think if you scratch the surface, if you're still growing up poor there, disadvantaged, then I think it's very much the same, if not worse, because you're exposed to all of these things that you can't interact with, you can't engage with, because you can't afford a £3.50 cup of coffee. And, you know, all these pizza restaurants and everything that pops up, you don't really have access to. So I think that, and the addition of social media, I think kids have probably got a bit of a harder time than I had, because we were all on somewhat of an equal playing field when I was a kid. None of us had very much, and that was fine. You know, we made do and we had a lot of fun. Whereas I think kids now have their face pushed up against the glass a little bit, you know.
Yeah, I think that's
looking through a pane of glass, looking at a world that they don't really have access to. And it's weird because the 2 coexist. And they always have in London. That's always been one of the best things about London, is like you can, you have a £2 million house and then 2 minutes down the road, you've got a council estate. Even when I lived in Chelsea later on in life, I lived on Lots Road. Right at the bottom of my road was World's End Estate. Yeah. And I like that about London, because I think it encourages tolerance. I think that's one of the best things about, or one of the one of the better things about gentrification. It's not something I'm a huge fan of if it's not inclusive, which it normally isn't. People get pushed out. But I think it encourages tolerance, because I think there's a lot of fear. I think, we all have sort of shallow parodies of each other as far as class. We look at the posh as people who talk like this and have no understanding of the real world, and they look at us as common folk who have no class. And that's not the same to be said for everyone, but like I say, we have these shallow parodies, and it's not until that you come across each other and you learn that actually, as people, we're all quite tolerant and understanding and inquisitive and curious and willing to learn and understand what we haven't experienced.
We've got Sorry, I was just going to say, because this fits in nicely with how we've set up Carneys actually. We're based down in Battersea, and we've got two housing estates on the right hand side, and then we've got Prince of Wales Drive on the left hand side, which is multi-million-pound houses. And
Yeah,
the benefit of setting up in somewhere like that rather than bang in the middle of an estate is that we've been able to bring in some of those that live on Prince of Wales Drive and introduce them to the guys that we're working with, who they've got preconceived judgments about. But
yeah,
as you say, it's vice versa as well. Other people, our participants, have got preconceived judgments about some of the guys that live on Prince of Wales Drive. And I think if we can create a situation where we can get people mixing a bit more, and we can encourage that sort of social mobility and that understanding that some people don't live on Prince of Wales because they've made a certain choice, and other people live in a housing estate because they've made a certain choice. Actually, you're generally born into a situation that you don't have too much choice about.
yeah. You don't really. I don't. Yeah, I can't imagine there's a time where you get to go. Oh yeah, I'd love for him and her to be my parent. I don't think that's something that we get to choose, is it?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of variables
Yeah.
which decides who you're brought up by, and your circumstances, and your, I guess, your social stature and where you fit in. I guess the problem is, um, and I didn't really understand it as a kid, so bear with me a second here because it'll take me a second to get to the point. But
Yeah.
I used to skate when I was a kid. Um, but I hung around with the Sweet Mates and the Rude Boys, so I was by no means a grunger, nor could I be, because life would have been very, very difficult. So when I used to skate, I used to I'd walk to Clapton Station with my skates and my skate clothes, like my baggy jeans in my bag, and I'd be wearing like my blue YSL jeans and my Reebok jumper and my Reebok Classics or whatever. And then when I got to Liverpool Street, I'd change. And then on the way home, I'd do the same thing. And it was weird, right? What I didn't understand, because where I used to skate, I met people from all different types of backgrounds. Sinead O'Connor's son used to knock about with us for a little bit, so everyone was from different places. So I learned to mix with people from outside the area. My world grew bigger quite quickly, and I was lucky for that, because for a lot of people it didn't. It was just as small as Hackney, for some even smaller than that. As I'm sure you'll understand, for some people it's almost their estate.
Yeah.
And the high road can be a risky place. And with that, like what I didn't really understand when I was that age is, like, I would think that certain people were a bit weird, but they weren't. They were just, they were more financially secure, and therefore, and I don't think that necessarily leads to more security, but they didn't have to identify as their ends. Do you know what I mean? So like, where I couldn't wear my baggy jeans in Hackney because I had to be Hackney, they didn't have that pressure. When you talk to people who are like middle to upper class, they tend to talk about what school they go to, not what ends or what area they're from, innit? And I used to just think they were all a bit weird. Like, why did but actually they weren't weird. They were just so lucky to be so comfortable in their own skin at such a young age that they were able to express themselves. And I think what we have now, people fighting over, it's not just areas anymore. It's not just postcodes, it's bloody estates. And it's really sad, because people are fighting over things they don't even own,
Yeah.
but
Exactly.
without any other purpose, that becomes their identity. And I do think that growing up where you grow up plays a huge part in who you are. And like me growing up in Hackney is incredibly important to me, but it could have been Tottenham, it could have been Brixton, it could have been Battersea. It still would mean a lot to me, but it doesn't define me to the extent that that's all I am.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's taken me a long time to kind of unlearn certain behaviors. As a kid, I was really quiet and shy, and then became the opposite. I became very reactive because I used to suppress so much. And you learn to survive, right? We all learn, no matter what our situation. And, a lot of what we experience as far as abandonment and some people feel an entitlement, they want everything without doing the work, that exists at the other end of the spectrum for the rich as well. That's not,
No.
that's not just reserved for the poor. That exists. It just looks different at the other end of the spectrum. And as kids, no matter what your environment, you learn a set of tools to survive by. And what's funny about becoming an adult, an actual adult, not the one you think you are in your 20s when you're trying to be an adult, is that you actually then have to spend almost as much time as you have learning, unlearning. And it's really difficult to unpick all that stuff, because I don't need the same tools to survive now that I needed then.
Yeah.
It doesn't serve me any purpose being reactive now. It just embarrasses me, it makes things really awkward. And it's funny, on the other side of not being reactive and not being angry, and when you think about men and emotions, it's not even really emotions, it's just an emotion, or it's just anger. When you allow yourself to be upset instead of angry, it's scary because you feel bullied. But it doesn't, yeah, and I'm not a victim. I've never been a victim irrespective of anything that's happened to me. That's my attitude. That's because I choose to not be a victim. And I think it's just funny how you spend all these years learning things, and then you get to a point where if you're lucky enough to work things out, you have to start unlearning things to be able to function within the part of the world that you find yourself in.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think part of the problem with society at times is they don't understand that people learn certain behaviour in order to deal with the situation that they're coming from, and then I think people get judged on the behaviour rather than on the person they are, or rather than on what caused that behaviour. So we look at the consequence, and that's the focus of our attention, but we don't pay too much attention to why someone's behaving in that way. And I think that's what we've really got to focus on if we're looking to change and improve things with society.
100%. What you were saying about encouraging people to mix, I think is really important though, because people not getting, like I did a documentary where there was a young kid who was trying to get into Trinity, which is the maths college at Cambridge University, and he was a working class kid from Eastleigh, near Portsmouth, and he, like his whole family, speak not like I do because they're not Cockney, but they're common. So. Which is nothing to be ashamed about, but he felt as though he had to, he was almost speaking in RP with C pronunciation. I don't know if you've seen any episodes of The Crown, but basically like that. And it was all social camouflage. He was an incredible kid. He was so incredibly bright, but he felt that he had to create this image in order for him to fit in where he was going. And I think that's a shame. And I think it's sad that people will pass judgment if you don't speak a certain way or you don't look a certain way, because there's some incredibly bright people that I guess get overlooked because of how they sound or what they look like.
Yeah, people have immediate assumptions, and that's what we try and avoid. It's the whole judging a book by a cover rather than actually looking at that person in themselves and seeing the strengths within them.
Yeah, and there's a lot of fight in us. I think that's different when you have everything handed to you. It's not to say that your life is necessarily a happy one. There's a lot of people who come from very wealthy backgrounds who were abandoned and not parented by their parents. It just, like I said earlier, it just looks a lot different. But it's quite difficult, I think, to have the fight, the grit and the drive and the determination that we have, because we want to get beyond where we are. When you're comfortable, and even me, I notice in my life, the more comfortable things get, the more I have to stay on my toes and be aware of consciously keeping myself in that place. Otherwise, it's just like, I could never be middle class because I always have working class anxieties. My children, on the other hand, when I have them, that may be different. I hope it is.
It's reminding me of a phrase. So Marvin Hagler, the boxer, he after winning the world championship and the world title belt, he said, he just made a comment saying it's very difficult to get out of bed at 6 a.m. and go for a run when you're wearing silk pajamas. That's pretty much spot on. He's got that drive and that fight, but when he's got everything he needs, he loses that motivation to really go out there and do the training that he needs to do.
That is a punchline. I've not heard that one, and I am a fan of pajamas, but that was a habit I picked up long before I became successful, and they're not silk. Do you know what though? I think that the scary thing about that then is self-sabotage, and I've probably done that a few times in my life. There's a website that I write for called The Book of Man, and I wrote an article called The Big Red Button. And it's theoretical, it doesn't exist, but it's just like, okay, everything's going really well for me right now. So what can I do to disrupt it so as I've got something to feed off? Because I mean, if you're someone who's been used to turning bad into good and using that as your driving force, you almost, in the same way that when I used to smoke weed when I was younger, I used to think I had to smoke weed to write lyrics because I associated weed with music. But it was just an association. I can write lyrics whether I'm stone cold sober or otherwise. I can be in a bath and write a song. I don't need to be smoking a spliff around my mates in a hot box room. It's not how it works. But you learn these habits and you make these associations, and it's kind of like, it's refreshing getting to a point where you understand that you don't have to push that big red button. You don't have to self-sabotage. You don't have to create chaos in your life for you to have a driving force. That driving force is in you. It's how you've got where you are. A word that I love is resilience. And I think I do a lot of talks around mental health and mental well-being, especially amongst men. You know, I go to prisons everywhere because there's a lot of places where there's, you know, a lot of bravado and a lot of machoism where people you have to hold it up, you know. You can't be seen to show weakness because it will be taken as, sorry, you can't be seen to show kindness or vulnerability because it will be taken as weakness. And there's something to be said for owning your vulnerabilities. And I know there are places where that's still impossible, but I think it's really, really, really important to be sensitive to things. I think it's really sad to deny yourself the opportunity to feel everything, you know, and then have it just come out as anger.
Yeah, exactly. And it's that emotion that comes out. And I think you're right. I think there's conditioning as well, sort of social conditioning, where there's an expectation for certain people that they're going to fail, and they become conditioned in that way. And it becomes, for some people, I think it becomes their comfort zone. I know we employ, the vast majority of the people we employ are participants that have come up and kind of changed their lives around. And we've had a few times where people who've been told how terrible they are on a consistent basis have then started doing really well, and they're then congratulated and told how well they're doing, and it feels really uncomfortable because it's not their norm. And then you see self-sabotage there as well, because they've been told so often they're not going to achieve, they're not going to be told they've done well, that they just can't break through it. And someone's talking to me about yesterday actually and gave a good analogy, which is, if you look at a circus and you get a baby elephant, you stick a wooden stake through the floor, chain it up, and it can't pull that stake because it's only small, so it can't break away. But then when it goes into an adult, it can quite easily pull away, but it stays there when it's chained up. It's been conditioned to that you're not going to be able to kind of spread your wings and move on. You have to stay within this position.
That's mad, isn't it? I've got a song on a mixtape I did when I signed to Mike Skinner's record label about 16 years ago now, called Save Me. And it's just one of the lyrics is just, he was told he wasn't going to be so much he believed it.
Yeah.
And it's that simple. And exclusion, I think, is a real problem. You know, and it exists on so many levels, from the exclusion we were talking about earlier because of the class divide and being disadvantaged and not being able to afford to access, you know, all the shops that are popping up on your high street now. It's become a popular area, but also from circles, you know, from groups, also at school. You know, naughty kid gets sent to the back of the class, then out of the class. It's exclusion. You're being separated, you're being isolated. You're going to look for somewhere where you are included. And all too often, I think, especially when you grow up in a largely disadvantaged area, or where portions of the area are largely disadvantaged, the areas that are inclusive are the areas that are going to get you into trouble.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
A lot of it comes from low self-esteem, you know, for all the bravado that comes with knocking bits out and making money and being this guy on the roads and all that stuff. You know, it's weird. There's a lot of low self-esteem amongst all of those people.
And the exclusion kind of comes from, again, what we were talking about previously. So I think there's I don't know, we basically, as a society, I think we exclude people who are most in need of being included. And
because it's easier.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's easier, because it takes time and effort to help people who struggle to get on with things.
Exactly. It's easy to look at their behaviour and then focus on that rather than focusing on what's caused that behaviour, or even trying to understand what's caused that behaviour.
It's difficult, though. You know, I've got a friend who works with people I went to a pupil referral unit when I was 13. You asked me how school was earlier. I was a really bright kid. I just hated going to school. Always told my nana I had a bellyache. I didn't realise it was anxiety. I thought it was a stomach ache because I didn't have the language. So now I've got a knot in my stomach because all this stuff was going on with my dad not being here, him being in and out of my life, my mum not being here, you robbing Peter to pay Paul, working 3 jobs a day, shuffling me away when the debt collectors come round. I'm taking all this on now and it's making me feel really, really anxious. You know, I didn't have that. But yeah, it's really like unpicking all those things and understanding them is such a timely thing. And my friend who works in a school for people who can't go to school for a multitude of reasons, so be it whether they're terminally ill or they, you know, they have Asperger's or, you know, bad behavior, they have ADHD, or the whole spectrum. But what he finds incredibly difficult, and I love him to bits for it, because he's in the relentless pursuit of helping people and he never gives up. But what he finds really difficult is that all the work that he can do in a day is often undone when these kids go home to the situations that they're in.
Yeah.
And prevention is always better than cure. If we create a better environment for people, they're going to turn into better people. You know, they're not going to suffer the same difficulties. And something I was talking to Tricky, who's from Hackney, and we've wanted to have a discussion about for ages, is PTSD, because it exists. You know, there's a lot of people who go into jail, come out of jail, go back into jail, and, you know, everything that they witness, they become institutionalized. But on the back end of that, you know, when they get into their adult life and they realize how many years they've lost, and they all of a sudden don't want to go through that anymore, they have to start looking at things. And I think there's a lot of PTSD that exists amongst these people, and not even just the adults, the kids, you know?
Yeah.
And it's not just the person that is this on the, you know, I think it's people quite often who are on both sides of the weapon.
Yeah. I mean, if you're sort of being excluded from school, being robbed, being experiencing violence, experiencing domestic abuse or witnessing domestic abuse, those are all traumatic situations that it's going to lead to certain conditions like PTSD. And again, it's looking at what's caused that before you can even help and support these people. And I think that, again, as a society, we'd much rather blame and sort of exclude rather than look at, right, what have we as a society done wrong to create a situation where this child has grown up to have to experience these incidents, and then it's impacting on their behaviour.
Well, as soon as someone's a criminal or a violent criminal, they have a tag, don't they?
Yeah.
They're just a violent criminal.
Yeah.
Disregarded.
Yeah.
And that's it. They don't need dealing with anymore. We don't need to help that person because they're a bad person.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, often so far from the truth. Like some of the stuff that, and the situations that my closest friends have ended up in are very different to, you know, to mine. And the difference between me getting here and them not has been someone getting pulled over.
Yeah.
You know, I feel very, very fortunate to be in the situation that I am, because there was, you know, years of days where it could have gone the other way. All it would have taken was a car getting a tug.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's a sad state of affairs. But so we've spoken about education. You said you were bright, but you were at a pupil referral unit. How do you think the education system's set up? Do you think it's set up well? Because we find some of the kids that we're working with who don't do well in education, they're actually unbelievably intelligent. It's just they don't fit into that education system or that way of learning.
Yeah, I think it's quite rigid. I mean, it's Victorian, isn't it? Everyone's taught in rows to get them ready for factory life. It's still
Industrial Revolution. That's when we created it, and it's not changed since then.
I mean, if you're lucky enough to pay for education, then I think there are different options. But coming from a council estate, that wasn't something I was offered. Although when I was leaving primary school, my teacher, Mr. Friend, got me the opportunity to sit an exam for a scholarship at St. Paul's, which I just went, it's crazy. So at 11, I went, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to go there. And so at 11, I felt like I knew my place in the world. And it was because I was scared and I knew I wouldn't fit in. I'd have been like a fish out of water. You know, how would I fit in amongst those people? And then 2 years later, I go from having the chance to sit the entrance exam for a scholarship to St. Paul's to being in a pupil referral unit. I mean, they're opposite ends of the spectrum. I think look, if you find, and I've seen it in people, I've seen it myself, as soon as they find a way to express themselves, they find their voice, they find what they care about, they find a purpose beyond where they are from. And, you know, they start to progress because they develop a passion. What I think is really sad is like when you see, you know, all these people who have things imposed. Like I remember Gigs doing one of my first London shows with me. and he shouldn't have been he couldn't be on the bill because he wasn't allowed to perform in London. Because of things he had been arrested for, the police had decided that he was a risk, so he wasn't allowed to perform. And you have them imposing all of these restrictions and imposing censorship on all these artists now who are doing the one thing that gives them a chance to not only change their life, but actually inspire other people to make music instead of go out and do everything naughty.
Yeah.
You know? And I think I think that needs addressing. I think that needs looking at, because people are finding their way through something that doesn't involve them selling drugs or the violence that comes with that, you know. And yes, some of us talk about stuff in our music that isn't nice to hear, but it's all stuff that goes on. Yeah. You know, it's not a chicken. It's not a chicken or egg situation. It's really not. One does come before the other. That life came before the music.
Yeah, exactly. I've had this battle with people in the past, because we've got a music studio down at our centre as well, and there'll be complaints about some of the lyrics and what people are talking about, and it's focusing on the negative. And what we're trying to get across to people is actually it's focusing on their lives and what they've experienced. And actually, if they have to experience it, then I don't see why other people shouldn't be able to listen to it, because they're talking about their lives. It's not.
I mean, people make a lot of money off the war stories, didn't they? You know, How many soldiers sell books?
Exactly.
But
that's a good point. That's a really good point.
You know, it's not like music is the only place where violence exists. Yeah, I mean, I'm not even torn on that. I just think it's ridiculous. This stuff is happening. Yeah. Should it be glorified? No, it shouldn't be glorified, but it does happen. I think if you can find a way to articulate it that encourages people to do something a bit different, then, you know, all well and good. And I just wonder if it's a case of people wishing that actually no one had any idea of how bad it was.
Yeah, because we don't want to hear it. If we're living in a nice sort of cozy little world where nothing really goes wrong, we don't want to hear about all the negatives that other people are going through. It's going to bring
you don't have to deal with it either, do you? If it's not recognised as a problem, it doesn't have to be dealt with.
Yeah, exactly. So you said that what's quite important for young people is to find a passion and something they're good at. So obviously with yours is music. How did that all come about? When did you first discover a passion for that?
I was either at Lee Valley Ice Rink, or I was in Edmonton at Roller. It was called Roller City, then it closed down, then it was called Roller Express, or the other way around. But it was one of the two places, and I heard Biggie for the first time. I heard the One More Chance remix with Faith Evans, and before that, I just listened to Jungle. Like, all the olders used to come in their probably stolen cars in the flats and playing their Jungle tapes. And obviously, Brocky was from Clapton. Jungle was big in East London. Dungeons were on Leabridge Road. All the olders used to come stumbling back in from raves into the flats at like 9 o'clock in the morning with their eyes looking weird, and I had no idea what they'd been doing then. So I was into Jungle, but then when I heard Biggie, I was like, who's that? What's this? And I just started to, do my research, started to listen to Westwood on a Friday night, taping it on my little Maxell cassettes, trying to, turn the tape frantically so I didn't miss a song when one side ran out. And nothing. It was the lyrics. It was the, it was the storytelling. I'd never heard no type of, my nan used to play Jason Donovan, Kylie Minogue and Engelbert Humperdinck. It was traumatic. That was the most traumatic part of my childhood, actually. But I never heard anything that I connected with as much as rap music. And it was like, for all the bravado that people talk about, for people that don't understand the music, for all the bravado they say is a part of it. Yes, there is some bravado, but there's why shouldn't you show off and be cocky in your wordplay and your ability to manipulate words and language, and be so smart with it and tell stories and articulate your entire life inside 3 minutes. Why shouldn't you be cocky about that? And people talk about how macho it is, but the artists that I connected with, there were elements of that, but for the larger part, they were sensitive, they were open, and they were honest. It was like, there's a type of therapy called cognitive behavioral therapy. And a cornerstone of that is journaling, where you write down what you think, feel, or observe at any given time. So you've got perspective. So the week after you felt something, you go back, you look at what you wrote, and you go, God, why was I worrying about that? It was completely unimportant. That's what writing lyrics is for me. And artists like Biggie, like Nas, they put themselves into their music. They put what they saw into their songs. They put what they felt into their songs. It was very, very it was raw, it was open, it was honest.
Yeah.
You know, and it was that before it was macho, or it was, you know, it was bragging. And so when I started to write music when I was 18, so there was a long time between me starting to listen to hip hop, which I guess was a great way to learn, because I listened to some of the best rappers there ever will be. You know, it was the golden era, late 90s, early 2000s. And then when I was 18, I started to freestyle with my pals. I got put on the spot once, had to rap a lyric, went bright red in the face, wanted to hide under the table, and everyone was like, "What? You can rap? You can spit? Yeah, you got bars." And then I started to bit by bit kind of find my voice and my confidence. And it's funny because I went from like a shy kid to someone who was getting on stage and rap battling, which is one of the most high pressured situations I've ever been in to this day. Someone asked me if I missed it yesterday, and I don't. I'm so happy for those times, and I'm so happy I cut my teeth in the hardest way possible as far as rap. No one can really question whether or not I can rap. I've done it. You know what I mean? But God, I don't miss the pressure. Having to get up on stage in front of a crowd full of people who, no matter how much they backed you, wanted to see you trip up. And the better you were and the farther you got along in this process, the more wins you had under your belt, the more they would turn a little stumble into a big problem. So it was, and then you got your opponent who's going to say all sorts of horrible things. You don't know who you're going to battle, but if you're on a winning streak, they know they're battling you, so they're coming prepped. And I would just stand there and be completely nonchalant. Just stand there on my back to them, wouldn't make any expressions whatsoever on my face. I'd just be like, why they'd be angrily rapping at me from behind. I'd be making out I wasn't listening to a single word. I was listening to every little thing that they said, remembering what they were wearing, what they looked like, what I knew about who they were and where they're from, or something I'd heard about them from elsewhere, and trying to put the puzzle together in my mind as to what, you know, the puzzle that was my next verse. You know, I was listening to every single word so as I could throw it back at them. But when I found rap, man, I mean, look, I was 18, yeah? I didn't start selling records until I was 27, 28. So that tells you everything about the drive and the focus that it gave me, because there was a lot of people around me that in that time gave up and said to me, come on, bro, you got to find something else to do, man. What are you doing? Still trying to, you know, still knocking out a bit of this and a bit of that so I could support myself and still be able to make music, you know, the whole time risking freedom. And then eventually it happened. You know, I got over that hill, 2009. I signed my first deal with a major record label. And then 2010, we put our first single out, and it charted at number 3 in the charts. And you got to remember, these times, there wasn't people doing 1 million on YouTube. You know, you're lucky if you did that in 12 weeks, because people didn't have YouTube on their phones. Yeah. People didn't ingest music in the same way. They didn't consume it in the same way. There was no rap industry in the UK. There were people that come before me. You know, you had Skinny Mans, Rodney P's, London Posse, Task Force, Jest, but they were underground. There was no crossover rappers. You know, before you had obviously Chip and Tinchy come from the grime scene, Dizzy, but there was no UK rap that had really crossed over, not to that extent. And it's funny, we thought we were having it off at that time, and now you see the kids today, and my God, mate, they're making M's off of bloody independent releases. It's amazing, you know. And I guess there wouldn't have been that without us, in the same way that there wouldn't have been us without, you know, what came before.
Standing on the shoulders of giants.
Yeah.
So there's two things I really took from what you've just been saying about that experience. So the first one is the fact that you're a hard worker, and you just put the work in because you've stuck through the music for that long to be a success. You've been able to get there. And I think lots of people will look at musicians and think, oh, they're lucky. Yeah, they're lucky they're doing that. They're lucky they've managed to get to that position.
Overnight success that took
exactly. They woke up one day, decided I'm going to be a musician, then they're selling millions of tracks, and they're not recognizing the amount of work that has to get put in order to get you to that sort of position. Yeah. And then the other thing is what you were saying about being terrified in the rap battles, and it's like going through that process. That's teaching you a transferable skill. That's, if you can do that, why can't you stand up in front of a boardroom? Why can't you do it? These are all skills and talents that people have got. You might be in a different area or a different field, but you've got to recognize the strengths within your character if you're able to do those sort of things. And I think even whether you were, I reckon even if you hadn't taken music any further, those experiences would have helped you in whatever direction you wanted to take your life.
They give you confidence, and this is what I mean about low self-esteem. I was up to stuff before I was doing it. You know, I appeared confident in other ways, but I wasn't. You know, it was finding something that I actually loved and enjoyed, that I was good at, that I could actually take pride in, because there's no pride to be taken in selling drugs.
Yeah.
There isn't. I don't, you know, and I don't think anyone who actually has got their head screwed on, who's been through that, would say there is. There isn't. You know, you become a victim of circumstance, and perhaps that's the only way. I mean, it was a choice, but perhaps that's the only way I'd ever look at myself as a victim. You know, I was exposed to things that became normalized, and I made choices that led to me doing things which there is nothing to take pride in.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree. I think those skills are transferable, because you learn to understand, one, that you can command the room, two, that people will listen to your voice, and three, that you can communicate. And I think they're all really, really powerful tools.
Yeah, 100%. And even like, obviously selling drugs is not anything to be proud of, but even that in a way has transferable skills. It's your understanding about supply and demand and all that sort of stuff. If you can,
it's a commodity. Listen, if you're good at it,
if you can run a good line, then that means you can run a good business. And I mean, we've got someone at the moment who's doing really well. He's got paint and decorating business. For each house they paint the bedroom of a child living in poverty for free. It's amazing. But he was also heavily involved in drug sale. He was heavily involved in crime. But what he was able to do was to pull out all of these sort of leadership skills and this knowledge and understanding, and turn it into something that was legit. And I mean, I was speaking to him last night actually, and he was saying that the biggest difference compared to what it was like before is he goes home feeling really proud and pleased with himself, and someone that his kids should be looking up to, doing something good for society, rather than feeling that shame and having that kind of aggressive attitude, because he's actually feeling pretty crappy about what he's doing for himself.
And I think it's weird though. I think, you know, back in the day it was a lot more honest. In that I think people did it and wanted to get out a lot of, you know, and there was always the people who got greedy and liked the name. But I think there were a lot more character. I just, to be fair, I just think that we're more densely populated now. There's just a lot more people, so you've probably got less of the good and more of the bad. But I think people did genuinely do it to get a leg up, and they got out. But it goes back to, you know, it's weird, isn't it? We all thought we wanted to get out of Hackney, but what we wanted to escape was our social circumstances. It just goes back to that, doesn't it? You do anything just to get away out of that, to get a leg up. And it's difficult when you're born on your back foot. You do feel like, sod the system, you know, it's done nothing for me. It does nothing for me. It is literally set up for me to fail. And there's hurdles at every turn, isn't there? And there's a lot you have to overcome. And I think question I get asked a lot is what would you say to your younger self? And hypothetically, I would give him so much advice and tell him not to do this and where to do better, and how not to do as much wrong. But in reality, all I'd say is carry on, because that's the one thing that has got me where I am now, and it's the one thing that will get me wherever I'm going. It's the ability to carry on. So throughout, and it's not just been like, my traumas don't just relate to where I come from. You know, I've had surgery where I've nearly died. I've had accidents where I've nearly copped it, and they are almost, because they're freak, there was no choice involved. You know, when I got stabbed, there was half a choice that could have been avoided. But when, you know, other stuff has happened and I've not had a choice, that's been worse for me mentally, because I grew up knowing of, and, you know, people getting stabbed and worse, and it was somewhat normalized. But then other stuff that happened in my life has sent me more west, because it's like you all of a sudden just become so aware of your mortality, and you understand that actually in the blink of an eye things can change. You don't always have a choice. You know, there's nothing that you could have done to, you know, have had any to have had a different outcome in that situation. And it can put you at a point where you're made aware of just how fragile life is, and then you realize how much you value it. But you pick yourself back up and you carry on.
Experiences that make you what you are. It's you have to go. It's the learning process. Even when people make mistakes, it's your mistakes are your learning processes. We talk about in boxing, you get a win or you get a learn. It's only a loss if you haven't learned anything from it. And in order to be the best you need to go through making the mistakes. You need to go through messing certain things up so you learn from it. And we see it a lot with young people that have. I had one young person who we did a presentation and to talk about how well he's done and the fact that since we worked with him, he's been in prison 7 times and but now he's doing really well. And people were presenting to saying, well, you didn't do a very good job then, because when you started working with him, he ended up going to prison 7 times. And he quickly jumped in and said, no, I had to do that. I had to go through those processes to get myself to the position I'm in today. If I hadn't, I wouldn't have had that hunger and drive, and I wouldn't have learned from the mistakes that I've made, and I'd probably end up making more of those mistakes as an older person.
Yeah, listen, everyone's journey is different as well. That's why you can never really look at an next man and compare yourself. You shouldn't. It's not healthy. And I think there's a lot of that in today's world. It's easy to, isn't it? You get stuck scrolling. It's like, oh, so I'm stuck in Dubai and I'm stuck in Battersea, or I'm stuck in Clacton, or I'm stuck in Lewisham. You know what I mean? And it can kind of, it can provoke really horrible things in people, you know, jealousy. I think jealousy, guilt, regret, they're all useless emotions. They don't push you or propel you in the right directions. I think, you know, I wouldn't want to go through everything that I've been through twice, but I'm in a funny way, I don't know if grateful is the right word, but let's go with grateful. I'm grateful for it, because the only way that you learn to be resilient is by going through hardship, you know, suffering trauma, and then understanding that you can survive that and you can come out of it and you can actually move on from that to an even better place. And that teaches, I think that makes us dangerous in a good way, you know, because you're aware that you can survive. So you're not as coy, you're not scared about things. You understand that, yes, trouble can come your way, but you don't have to preempt it. You don't have to live in a life of, you know, constantly being in fight or flight, just surviving. You can actually live. And this is all stuff I talk about with my therapist. You know, this is all stuff I'm just beginning to understand and learn to put into practice now. It's beyond me just talking a good game. I've spoken a good game for years, but I've been behind the scenes trying to put it all into practice. And I found it difficult at times. I'm still very much a work in progress, but they're the things that are important to me. And it's going, okay, well, I have survived. And if something comes up 99.9% of the time, you know, just by law of averages, I understand that I will most likely survive. So why would I live in fear of what's around the corner or trying to preempt what's around the corner? And it's sad to do that. I look back on some of the highlights of my life and realize that I wasn't present because I was worrying about what's around the corner. Because of the first lessons that I learned, you know, some of the first lessons that I learned were, you know, panic, were loss. You know, so you fear those things, and then it's just weird, isn't it? You spend so long learning things, and then you've got to unlearn them all.
Yeah, exactly. But I think, like you're saying, hardship does teach you, and traumas do teach you how to deal with certain situations, and kind of bringing it onto boxing as I always do. It's if you look at people who've become successful boxers, like, in the sort of 60s, 70s, 80s, you're looking at the sort of African Americans who were coming from real hardship. Nowadays, you're looking more at some of the Eastern Europeans who are coming from some real hardship. And in general, when you look at the people who've been big successes and who've been able to sort of bite down and get through some of those really like serious, heavy fights, it's the people who've been through hardships before and have again kind of conditioned themselves in order to get through those situations and to know that they can get through those situations.
And it's the mental conditioning, isn't it?
Exactly.
There's only so much you can do with your body, and I think we're all too often like we know how to train to lift more, you know, to get stronger in that sense. But it's your head that will get you through most things in life. And I think it's a shame that we aren't encouraged to learn those tools. Like when I talk about therapy, I think in the same way as actually just general health, overall health, especially with men, we don't practice much as preventative here. It's like we go and see a doctor or we end up at the hospital during the moment of crisis. Whereas beyond freak accidents, you know, there are preventative things, you know, you can live better and give yourself a better chance of never ending up in that situation. And I think it's the same thing with therapy. You know, you can learn a lot from psychologists. They understand the workings of the mind. What do you need to get through day-to-day life? You know, you don't have to walk around fighting every day. So you don't, you know, Kung Fu is great. Boxing is brilliant. It's great discipline. It's a great way to learn to discipline yourself. And as you understand, you need your head as much as you need your body in it. But we're not need to train our minds in the same way.
Yeah.
And I just wish, especially kids from disadvantaged backgrounds where things are so much more unstable and they actually need a greater understanding of what they're experiencing and help to manage that suffering. And I just wish there was something in place for those kids.
Yeah, it's a way of understanding and being able to control your emotions as well. And as you say, it's mental and it's in your head. They say with boxing, it's about 10% physical and 90% mental. And if you like, boxing is often given the criticism of, oh, it's an aggressive sport, you're teaching aggression, but it's not what it is. It's a sport that's teaching you how to control your aggression. Aggression is an emotion which is fine to have as long as you're in control of it. But as soon as you lose control of that emotion, the likelihood is you're going to lose the fight. And you look at fights like Rumble in the Jungle, which is where Muhammad Ali beat someone who should have beaten him, but he did that by controlling his opponent's emotions whilst also controlling his. He got his opponent, George Foreman, really angry, so that he was using up all of his energy in the first 7 rounds where then Muhammad Ali was just covering up. And then he picked him off with shots that would never have normally knocked him out. He's perfectly controlled his own and his opponent's emotions, and that's why he's ended up winning.
And that's a transferable skill, right? Because you have to learn to not expel energy where it's not worth it. And I used to be more reactive than I am now, and it's taken me a long time to learn not to be. And it's pointless emotion. You're handing over energy to people, into situations where it just doesn't need it.
Yeah, exactly.
And life's a lot better when you're not walking around just boiling, waiting to explode. But you have to stop suppressing things to get to that point, which is difficult because then you have to deal with the upset. You have to deal with the difficulty of looking at yourself and actually understanding who you are. It's difficult. A lot of people, sadly, especially in this day and age now, I think they spend a lot of time looking at themselves as the person that they assume everyone else thinks they are, which never gives you a chance of being yourself.
Yeah,
but it's not easy taking a proper look at yourself because you find things that you're not proud of and you're not happy with. But if you don't know they're there or you ignore them, how do you ever improve?
and deal with it, exactly. So you mentioned earlier about you've been through things, not just sort of hardships in your upbringing, but I think you mentioned surgeries that you could have ended up not coming out of it. I mean, obviously, you can see your tattoo on your neck, and I know a little bit about the background behind it. But do you want to say what happened there and how it's impacted on you as well, and how you've dealt with that?
Yeah, someone walked up behind me and put a broken bottle into my neck. We had a little argument over something stupid. He said I barged his mate and I hadn't. And then he told me to shake his hand and say sorry. Now this is the point where, and I said in that situation I had a choice.
Yeah.
I didn't barge him and I was polite and I'm passive. I don't walk around with a weapon. I never did. And I don't agree with that kind of behavior. It's different if someone slaps your sister. Or if something happens in the moment, but I didn't do anything. I'd walk past someone and I said, excuse me, he didn't hear me. I moved past him with an open hand and said, excuse me again. Then I get accused of barging him. And it's not even the person that I've moved past that's causing the problem.
Yeah.
We're in a packed club. Emotions are heightened because you've made noise and that everyone's watching. And the one thing, look, I am passive, but I stand my ground. That's the one thing that I've always done. I won't speak unless I have something to say, but in that situation, I wasn't willing to back down because I felt like I'd done nothing wrong. So why should I? And when I didn't, everything was kind of diffused, possibly not in the best way. But after that, I thought it was over and done with. And then, 5 minutes later, someone walked up behind me and put a broken bottle into my neck. We were still fighting. There were police outside the club. We got split up. My phone had come out of my pocket. I don't know if you remember the Nokia that looked like a fish.
Yes.
I think that was the phone that I had at the time. Or like a teardrop, whatever. And I can see the looks on everyone's faces and I couldn't see my neck. I was just holding it together. And obviously I'm full of adrenaline, so I can't feel any pain. I don't know that my whole face is hanging off. But I know I've been poked in the neck. And I mean, people have gone over less. It's not the best place to get poked, is it?
Yeah, exactly.
And so I phoned my nan and I apologised because I felt for all the work that she had put into me, I'd let her down, even though that wasn't, I wasn't responsible for that situation. That's not behaviour that I'm okay with. I don't agree with it. Like, I understand the violent nature of certain situations and certain career choices, but I wasn't in one of those situations.
Yeah.
And I don't agree with walking up behind anyone and doing that. I don't care about any code, bro, but that's not cool.
Yeah.
That's not how I operate, and I don't believe in it. I think it's cowardice. But yeah, I took responsibility for it. I found my nan and I just apologized because I didn't know if I'd see her again, innit? It was weirdly calm. We just sort of sat there and saw everyone's faces and expressions and was like, okay, well, I'm not going to go out crying. And I just sat there and then eventually the ambulance got there. They sent an air ambulance, but they couldn't get to me. They had to land too far away. And then the ambulance eventually got there. I got to the hospital and it was weird because I got arrested as well. And then when I come round, the doctors were like, they were quite aggressive with me because I think they thought I was in a gang or something. Like they didn't understand that there was no history between him and I. And it was so stupid. I wish for both of us that it had never happened. You know, it was so stupid. Like really juvenile and macho and all the things that I try and avoid now, you know. And in hindsight, I probably, if I was this age, I would have diffused the situation because it was pointless. You know, neither of us needed what came after that. It was so stupid. You know, everything I saw my family go through, I'm surprised my nan didn't have a heart attack. She'd already had one, you know. But the doctors were really like, they were just like, do you know how lucky you are to be alive? A millimeter and it would have cut through your carotid and you'd have bled out in 4 minutes. I'm like, I'm aware I nearly just died, man. I'm the one who got stabbed in the neck. And you're talking to me like I'm a piece of, you know what I mean? It was, I was really shocked at their attitude towards me. So yeah, I always wanted to read a room anyway, but I guess it just made me more vigilant and made me more hyper aware. And for a little while, it made me really angry. So I stopped going to clubs because I didn't want to give anyone the opportunity to do that again. And I felt when we walked away the first time that if I'd have put him down, then that would never have happened. And that's a really crappy attitude to have, you know, that's a really stupid attitude because then it could have ended up with me doing something to someone and ended up in a situation where I lost my freedom, you know, and I just don't like violence, mate. I really don't. Yeah. You know, if I'm genuine and it's taken me a long time to get to a place where I am that honest, I don't like it. Yeah. I really don't. I don't believe in it. I think when we all, you know, when people start shouting and screaming, like you said, when you lose control of anger, your energy's getting expelled, and it's energy that's getting wasted, and things go from 0 to 100 so quickly, and all of a sudden, you know, people have done something that they regret, but there's no taking some things back.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's interesting what you're saying about how they dealt with you at the hospital as well, and how they essentially kind of judged you because of the situation that you were in, and that you've been attacked and you've been the victim, yet they're dealing with you like you've asked for
the word victim now. I hate the word victim. I don't walk around going, woe is me. Never been a victim.
Wrong word, sorry. But you were the one who's been attacked. You've not done anything wrong with the situation, yet you're being dealt with like you're the person who's caused it. And I think we've sadly lost a number of young people to knife crime. I think it's 7 in the last 3 years, and again that's traumatic for the rest of the participants that we're working with, and also for our staff, because that's not anything that anyone should be going through. But we lost a participant last month. He was actually stabbed in the neck and died almost immediately. And there's this immediate assumption when people hear about that oh well, if he's going to be involved in gang life, and if that's the life that he's leading, but the reality is he's not involved in gang life. He's got no criminal record. He was somewhere where someone looked at him in a funny way, or he looked at them in a funny way, and it resulted in a knife being pulled out and him being stabbed in the neck. But
how quickly things go from something into nothing, and then all of a sudden you've got a family of people and friends who have lost someone that they love so dearly, you know, and on the other end of it, you've got someone who's probably sitting there going, oh my God, what have I done?
Yeah, exactly. And they're essentially going to be losing their lives because they're going to be locked up for a good amount of time. They're going to be on a life license. But and I think, firstly, people have got to be aware of the trauma that creates for the people who are involved and for the people who are friendly with them, and that trauma is what often leads to certain behaviours. We lost a young person last year who was stabbed and killed, and he was with another one of our young people who he'd been sent to prison twice for carrying a knife, and we'd done a load of work around trying to stop him from carrying a knife. And then what we had to deal with afterwards is him saying, "Well, look, if I had a knife on me when I at that point, I might have been able to protect my friend." And so you can see why that thought process is going
Yeah,
on.
it's really difficult because you can tell someone to put something down, not carry something, but you can't extract them from their circumstances.
Exactly. And I mean, how much do you think that trauma impacted on your mental health?
For me, do you know what? It was the more freak accidents that happened, and like when I was 20, well, no, how was that? I was in my 30s. It was 2017. So when I had surgery, that impacted my mental health more because I couldn't, again, there was no choice. I do feel like looking back on when I got stabbed, there was a choice. There was a way out, and it didn't involve that happening, potentially. So I was able to rationalize that, as well as people being, weirdly, and this is a horrible thing, but like people being stabbed having been somewhat normalized because of where I grew up. It was the other stuff that had more of a mental impact, because it just, you become, and perhaps it was a knock-on effect, and like it was cumulative. It was the accumulation of all of the things that have happened, and me becoming more and more aware of my mortality, and just going, God, again, like, really? Do I need to be made aware of my mortality again? But again, you get through it and you understand your strength. And listen, I think so I think I touched on it earlier, but you have to carry on for as long as you can. You carry on. One of my favorite songs, people would call it probably a guilty pleasure, but it's Green Day, "Time of Your Life." Yeah, I hope you had the time of your life. And all said and done, I think that's all we really want, is to have the time of our lives. And the only way we can really have that is if we find things that we enjoy. Because I tell you what, walking around angry is exhausting, whereas walking around, not necessarily happy. You can't be happy all the time, but content.
Yeah.
Content being your baseline, it changes everything. And being able to look at the positives in your life as opposed to the negatives is a really big step. No matter how small those positives are, they get bigger. You focus on them and they grow. So it's like anything, if I focus on scuffs on my skirting board, they start looking back at me, I mean, they become bigger problems. These little things start to manifest and they become bigger and bigger. Like when you keep something to yourself and you try and suppress it, it manifests and it becomes bigger and bigger because you're not expelling it. So yeah, I think, yeah, find the form of expression and carry on is probably the only advice I would ever give my younger self and to anyone else as well.
Yeah, no, 100% agree with that. I also wanted to talk to you because I know you've spoken in the past around about food poverty and also poverty anxiety as well, which I think is something that's pretty relevant, probably even more so now with the pandemic and everything going on than it has been in the past. And just, I suppose your opinion on that. I think there was one thing I heard you say. You basically trying to explain on one of the TV shows you were on about what it's like not knowing where your next meal's coming from, and the stress and the kind of emotion that can create in someone that a lot of other people don't recognize that. So yeah, if you could expand on that, that'd be great.
Everyone's got a mate who gets hangry, isn't
Yeah,
there? Yeah, let's put it in layman's terms. Everyone's got a mate who gets hangry. They get low blood sugar. They haven't eaten for a while. They start getting really moody and snappy, and then they realise, oh, it's because I haven't eaten anything.
Yeah.
Now, transfer that to a child, who has consecutive days of not being fed a breakfast before they go to school, and then tell me how they're expected to sit down and focus and concentrate in class and learn. Imagine seeing the stress of your parents not being able to provide food, or them going hungry in order to give you food. They're not stresses that anyone should have to endure. I grew up on free school meals, but it was normal because everyone grew up on free school meals. I just thought that everyone got a voucher from the government. I didn't even really understand. I probably didn't really understand they came from the government. I just thought everyone got a ticket to get their food. it's, I mean, just, you know, when you have a government who are taking on what we do this time as well, you know, everything that we're going through with, you know, the amount of unemployment, you know, the ever increasing number of people who are out of work. I was at a food bank in just by Streatham Hill the other day, and it's in an old church, St Matthew's, I think it's called.
Oh, right. With Lee, yeah, Lee Deemer runs some football sessions down there. He's a great charity down there, St
Yeah,
Matthew's.
but it's mad. Like it's the size of a small supermarket, and yet they're not going to be able to fulfill even half the orders they have this Christmas. And there's such a shallow parody of what someone who uses a food bank looks like. It's not Benefit Street. I don't even want to get started on that because I'll end this on an angry note, and I don't want to. But you know, it's like they've found the worst of the worst, and that's everyone's example of what it is to be poor. It's not like people using these food banks a lot of them are employed. You know, it's funny. Our government, you know, they throw around these figures about more people prior to this, more people being employed than in the last 10 years or whatever. But what they don't tell you is there's more people in employment that are beneath the breadline than ever. So it's people that are earning their poverty. They're working to earn their poverty. They have to still use and rely on food banks because they would otherwise have to go hungry, or their children would have to go hungry. Like the stress around, and you know, people who are afforded the luxury of being able to not worry about being able to put food on a plate don't necessarily understand the stress that comes from something as simple as food, or seemingly simple as food.
Yeah.
And I just, children is how do you concentrate? You know, that's the primary thing for me is how can you expect an undernourished child? Because people think of malnourishment as a lack of food. It's not just the lack of food; it's the quality of food as well. It's so much more expensive to eat well than it is to, you know, to get $1.99 chicken and chips.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we do a fit and fed program. We always have done with the boxing, where after each boxing session, everyone gets fed. And once the pandemic came in, we didn't want to lose that, so we started doing food deliveries, and we set up a situation where people could come down and collect food from us. But I mean, we found that the vast majority of people who were mostly in need were people who, like you say, who were in employment. And these aren't work shy people. These aren't people that are trying to sort of sponge off of do-gooders. These are people who are trying to get out of their situation as hard as they can. And they're also people who do not want to ask for anything. The biggest trouble we have is providing stuff for the people who are most in need.
Because there's a shame that comes with it.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. And so it's not just the trauma that they're going through of feeling hungry, not getting the right sort of nutrition. It's the fact that in a lot of situations they have to really embarrass themselves by coming and asking for some help, or by even accepting the help. And so you've got to be really sort of tactful in the way that you're doing it. But there's it's unbelievable how many people out there that are really struggling for finances and for food in particular, and especially for the young people who are growing up. And it's that it's going to have an impact on the development 100%.
Crazy, bro. Like, I mean, I know we haven't got long left now, but like homelessness, it's around the corner for most people. It's so easy, and it's what I learned from doing the documentary on it is just, and it's when I was growing up, like some of my friends' whole families were in hostels, but they weren't there for long. They were always housed. Now hostels are basically permanent accommodation for families, and some families exist in 2 rooms, you know, with shared facilities. Again, stress. How do you live on top of each other? And, you know, we need space. You know, we're not supposed to live in, you know, even the way we live in estates on top of each other is not necessarily healthy. It's not necessarily healthy psychologically. There's enough studies done into it, been done on it. But it's so scary how, like, you know, something goes wrong with your benefits 1 week, all of a sudden you're in arrears if you're in private accommodation, and the next thing you know, you're kicked out and your family's being split up because you all have to use separate hostels. There are hostels for women, there are hostels for men, and you know, it tears apart families, and the support that they had in their community, they might end up in a hostel on the other side of London. It's frightening times. The only thing I would encourage people to be is kind, and any little extra that you have, do try. And because the thing is, like, with that food bank and most food banks, the donations don't come from corporations.
Yeah.
Come from public donations, and it was remarkable to see everything that was in there, and to know that 99% of that came from public donations. And like I say, it looked like a small supermarket. It was stocked like one. It's not just food, it's baby milk, it's baby food, it's sanitary products, you know, it's everything that these people would otherwise go without. And they're doing good work. You know, they've got 150 volunteers there, and they service a huge area. But these food banks are everywhere now because, you know, there isn't an area where people don't need them, sadly. So, yeah, anyone watching this, if they can afford to give a little, please do.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's one of the real positives that has come out of the pandemic. That what we've seen is that there's people really have kind of stepped up and tried to offer support for other people. So we've had loads of people donating food. We've had loads of people cooking for the young people as well. And people who don't even know our young people, but who've seen what we're doing and have said, "Oh, we'd really like to bring some food down and help out." And it's nice seeing that actually there is a community out there who might not come from the same background as the young people that we're working with. Some of them do, but who do just want to actively help and give back. And I think that's, I think that, as I say, I think that's the most positive thing that's really come out of this pandemic.
Yeah. And again, you know, it's like, what are you going to learn from someone who's going through the exact same thing as you? You have to mix with people from other places who have experienced different things to learn anything. So I think that's encouraging.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's all about, and I mean, this is why we target disadvantaged young people aged 11 to 30, but we make sure that with all of our sessions, we have 2/3 target group and then 1/3 mainstream, because we want people to mix. And like you were saying that you used to go to a Peru. I mean, it's always struck me as a strange thing that you get young people who are misbehaving at school and you take them out and put them in a school together and expect them to improve their behaviour.
Exactly. What are you going to learn from someone who's going through the exact same thing as you? It's ridiculous. Yeah. I went to my mate's wedding. I'll leave you on this one. I went to my mate's wedding and they put me and all the naughty ones on the same table. It's like, what did you expect us to do? Not misbehave?
Exactly.
We were obviously going to get naughty. You know, you should have put us at the farthest corners of the room and kept us away from each other for as long as you possibly could.
Exactly. Well, listen, thanks so much for doing this. This is great. I can't wait to put it out and our participants see it. I've got one last question though. It's right. When this pandemic's over, do you fancy coming down and meeting some of our participants? Having a chat to them?
Yeah, I would love to. I'm not far from you anyway. I'm only down the road.
Brilliant. We might even be able to get you in the ring doing a bit of boxing training. Yeah,
you might have to give me a bit of practice before you put me in the ring. I might get shown up, but I'll probably get beaten up by an 11-year-old.
Well, I'm used to that. That's what happens to me.
Wicked. George, thank you very much, mate.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot. Cheers.
Take care, bro. Bye.
Bye.